obviously search me on Google Scholar, on Publons as well. Now, the most the statement that I get is, I don't know what to do. So this means that you've taken admission in your MS or your PhD, but you don't know where to go, what to do. Now, in order to understand, in order to answer this question, there are a few steps that one needs to take. The step one is identify your area of interest. Everybody has got his or her own area of interest. Now, what you need to do is, you need to first identify what's your area of interest. For example, mine is human resource management. Someone will have, say, finance. Someone will have anything else, maybe project, or maybe marketing, or supply chain management, or project success, or any other area. So first, identify what's your area of interest. Step two is your topic of interest. Now, in each area, you've got multiple topics, maybe hundreds of them. So in finance, you might be interested in earning per share, or organizational performance, or different types of organizational performance, objective measures of organizational performance. In HRM, you could have leadership as your area of interest. Mine is leadership, corporate social responsibility, internal marketing, and knowledge management. So once you know that this is your topic of interest, the next step is to identify or look into what is available in the literature. Now, the first step, when you are looking for what is available, you need to find out what has been done, what can be done in future, and what theories have been used in a particular topic. Now, how do you find out what has been done? A simple starting point could be, for example, very simple and easy to do starting point could be Google Scholar. Now, there is a very detailed video, and we did a webinar, and it was the most successful webinar that we did on how to search on Google Scholar, how to search using Mendeley. So do watch that video in order to properly understand how to use Google Scholar, because when you go through that video and see, okay, how this can be utilized for your literature reviews, you will understand you've been doing it all wrong all this time for the past maybe 20 years, or maybe since the Google Scholar began. So the first step is what is available. So let's search what is available. So let's say my interest is servant leadership. So what Google gives me, it gives me hundreds of papers. This link here will have hundreds of papers in there. I can't go through all these papers. So it's literally impossible for someone to go and read all these papers. So I want to know what is available, what's latest. So let's say I select since 2009 from here. Now what I see is, I see latest papers on servant leadership. This will give me a very clear idea as to what is done or what has been done. Now when you are searching for what has been done, it's a very good way, or what you should do is, you should look for systematic reviews. Recently, there has been a significant rise in using systematic reviews in business management. So what systematic reviews do for you is that they give you a clear idea of what has been done in the past 15, 20, 30 years on a particular topic. So let's say my area is servant leadership, and there is one topic done, or one systematic review done by Nathan Eva from Monash University. And this is the paper. So let's open this paper and see what's in there, and how this paper or this particular paper can help me. So let's download it and see what's in there. So what it does is, it gives me this paper written by Eva et al. And then obviously this is abstract, there is introduction, and the first thing is that I get a chart. This shows me that okay, this is servant leadership publications by year and type, the types of publications and the year of publications. So recently there has been a significant rise in the empirical studies on servant leadership. Furthermore, going down, it gives me the journals that have been publishing in this particular area. So this will help you identify the journal in which you can publish your study. So most of the studies have been done in Leadership and Organizational Development Journal and Journal of Business Ethics, 20 and 17 respectively. And this is their impact factor. Now there is a journal on servant leadership, 13 studies. So if you are focusing on knowledge management, you might come across Journal of Knowledge Management as a potential avenue to publish your research. So if you have got a systematic review, this will give you an idea what avenues can you use or where you can publish your research. Moving on, it will give you the differences in servant leadership and other leadership styles. And most importantly, it will give you an existing range of definitions that have been proposed in this particular topic, and how these definitions obviously complement, contradict each other. And they might have defined it in a more comprehensive manner as well that you can use in your study, because this is the first step. We will be looking into the normal mistakes that we make while we are doing our proposal writing or literature writing or thesis writing. But using this literature review or systematic review will give you a clear idea of what the concept is and how it has evolved. The next thing is, and a very important thing, is measures of servant leadership, because obviously we are focusing on business research, so we need to measure our variables. So what measures are available, and can you use those measures? Let's say these are the measures that are available. So you do not need to search separately for each measure. So okay, what measures are available to measure or scale servant leadership? These are the measures available. Just download these papers and use them. For example, this has got 6 items. So if you are looking for a unidimensional scale, this might be an answer. If you are looking for multidimensional scale, Loeb 1999 could be an answer. Or maybe Erhard, servant leadership, 14 items. So a systematic review will give you, under one paper, you will have your definitions, you will have the measures, and you will have how the concept has evolved. So this solves most of the problems that you might initially encounter in understanding a particular concept. Apart from this, this is something that is very important. Where have these studies been conducted, and what was the level of these studies? Recently, there has been a rise in multi-level studies on concepts. So you can see there are very few multi-level studies. So this is a particular gap that you can identify, and there have been very few qualitative studies as well. So if you are a qualitative researcher, what you can do is you can obviously use this paper as a reference to say that there have been very little research or qualitative research on this concept. Then obviously you will have to explain why qualitative research must be conducted in this area. And if you are, for example, in any country, see if there has been research in that particular country. Let's say we've got India here, just 3 studies. We've got Pakistan here somewhere, 5 studies. So very few studies. You can't just conclusively say, okay, this is servant leadership in Pakistan. But this is not a gap. This is not a strong gap. So apart from just focusing a study on a particular country, there have to be other gaps as well. There is a video available on gaps, or what is gaps, or what should be the gaps on the YouTube channel as well. We'll share the link to that as well. Now, another important thing is this, or these tables. You'll find most of these tables in systematic reviews. Okay, what it does is it tells you okay, what mediators have been tested, what outcomes have been tested. So you know that you are proposing a new outcome. If it has been tested with the same outcome, obviously this lacks originality. You need to propose new mediators to different outcomes. How do you do this? Through a systematic review. Again, this is another table. Mediators and outcomes. Mediators, outcomes. Now this is particularly important. This is what I like about systematic reviews. You are getting a whole nomological network as to what has been done. What antecedents to servant leadership have been evaluated. What mediators have been checked. Now, what outcomes have been checked. And what moderators have been checked. This is very important. Now, only using this you can propose your new research with new outcomes, new mediators, and new moderators with servant leadership. For example, somebody took LMX with the outcome OCB. So you can take LMX with, say, work-life balance. So you are checking a new mediator in the relationship. You can take a new moderator, or you can take new antecedents. If you look here, there have been very few antecedents to servant leadership studied. So what you can do is, just hold on, there are people trying to join, so just give me a second. Umar, can you post the Zoom link or Zoom invitation onto LinkedIn? Ms. Gulafsha wants her students to join. Can you do that, please, Umar? Thank you. Now, just give me a second. Let me do it. Just okay. Now, so using this particular nomological network, you can propose maybe tens of new studies, if not hundreds, but tens of new studies. Now, moving on. And there is another thing that is important in this particular paper, very important, and you will find it in every paper. And that is that it gives you directions for future research. So it is giving you research questions that you can utilize. So you can obviously take this research question and conduct your own study. For example, this says that so it says, how does organizational culture influence the display of servant leadership? So they have proposed research questions that future researchers can use and propose their own studies. Obviously, it's always recommended, do not take just one question. Merge these 2-3 questions together and propose your model. This will add to originality of your research. And another important thing that you get from these systematic reviews, it clearly identifies the theories that you should use. So you do not have to search for theories as well. This is a very good starting point for someone who does not know, okay, what should I do? Where should I go? What is available in research? So if you are a novice researcher who has just started, and you know that what research is and what should be done, but you do not know where to start, this is a very good starting point that one should obviously look into. Now, apart from this, it can obviously give you theories that have been utilized in existing research. What you can do is just press Ctrl F and write the word theory. So it will give you other theories that have been utilized in previous research. And obviously, whenever you are reading a paper, just write the word theory in that particular paper, and so to know that, okay, this particular variable is utilized, this is the theory that has been used to explain the relationship between variables. Now, moving on, let's look at the next steps. Step 4, has the top journals in your field focused on the topic of your interest? This is particularly important. Sometimes we focus on a particular topic that is actually not very important. For instance, recently me and Umar had trouble publishing a paper on university social responsibility. I've published maybe 7 or 8 papers on corporate social responsibility, and I thought that this could be a very viable topic for universities as well. But I could only manage one paper, and while I was writing my second paper, I had faced rejection for maybe 10 or 15 journals, and finally it went into review in recently, maybe 2 weeks ago. So look for a topic that has been used and researched in top journals. For instance, if we go back to our example here, Servant leadership was published in Academy of Management journal, and it can't get any better than this. Academy of Management is the topmost journals. So if they are publishing on servant leadership and only recently they've been publishing, well, this is particularly important. So this topic is viable. You should focus on this particular topic. And then start reading. And when you are reading, store relevant information. It's obviously important to read. But when you are reading and you keep on reading, you are not actually storing information. We are not computers that, okay, all information will be copied into our memory and we can retrieve the information whenever we want. This does not happen with humans. You need to store the relevant information. Now, how do you store relevant information? Obviously, there is a video already done, but let's say how to do it. This is an Excel sheet, and I'll share it with you all in the group as well. I'll share the presentation as well. The edited form of the video will be shared on YouTube. Okay, so now what information to store? You need to store the value of your research. Why it is important to conduct this particular study? What's the value of this particular area? What existing research is available? What are the gaps in existing research, or what gaps they have addressed? What theory did they use? What were the contributions of their study? What limitations did they identify? And apart from this, there should be other information as well. What variables did they use? What were the results of their study? So this is particularly important. And if you've got any comments after reading that paper, obviously put it in. Put a summary. Try to put a summary in there, at least for 10 to 15 papers initially that you read. So you get into the habit of summarizing things. So store relevant information. Once you have done it, you should be able to identify where a particular information is located. So once you have read through the paper, maybe 10-15 papers, you would know where the gaps are, or where the gaps are written. You would know where theoretical implications are written. You know where the questionnaire or the scales are provided. This is particularly important when you are writing your own thesis or your business research proposal. So you know this particular information will be located in this particular area. And then start proposing. But do not propose in haste. What I've seen in early career researcher is that they read 2 or 3 papers and then they come up with a model. And then they are proposing a model for research. But when you ask them, okay, what is this concept? They've got no idea what this concept is. And if you ask them, how are you going to measure this concept? They have no idea how it will be measured. If you ask them what theory are they going to use, they don't even know why a theory should be used. So do not propose in haste. I've been saying that you need to read at least 15 to 20 papers and understand every single terminology that is in the paper. For example, scales, measures, analysis, conceptual framework, theoretical framework, theory. You should be able to define these concepts in context of your research. And maybe in general, you should be able to understand or grasp these concepts as to what they are. Before that, you should not start proposing a model, because then you will propose a wrong model. And most of the times, and this is obviously, I'm not saying this because I'm a supervisor. This is the student to be blamed. A supervisor is just a guide. Initially, he might not have enough time to look into the details as to what you have done. So you have to take ownership of your learning. You are a MS or PhD student, and especially for PhD students, you have to take ownership of your own learning. It's 80% your own learning and 20% guidance. But obviously that 20% matters a lot. Now discuss with experts. Yes, you might be an expert in that particular area, but if you are conducting a new research, always discuss it. I'm going to give you my own example with Umar. Whenever I am proposing a new model, I always discuss it with Umar, because I know its knowledge management is particularly his area. He's doing PhD in it. My area is leadership, corporate social responsibility. So if he is proposing something with regards to leadership, corporate social responsibility, or internal marketing, he asks me. But if I'm proposing something related to knowledge management, I go to Umar. So if you are doing something related to analysis, ask an analytical expert. I came across a questionnaire recently, and the questionnaire, one of the questions was like this: do you love your job? For instance, the one of the question was like this: do you feel satisfied with your work? And you know, the scale in front was like strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, strongly disagree. This is what happens when you, and that particular person had already collected data on it. Now this is entirely wrong. When you are asking an interrogative question, the answer is yes, no, not agreement scale. Agreement is with statements, and this is not a statement to agree with. This is a question to answer with yes or no. So what if you have done this because you did not read enough, because you did not look into the items or how a particular concept should be measured, how it should be operationalized? You did not discuss it with the experts. For example, it was long ago, maybe 7 8 years ago, that there was a student, a lady came in, and she said, okay, I've done the tests, and these are my results, I've collected the data, this is my thesis, but the examiners have rejected my thesis. And I said, well, why? And when I saw she applied paired sample t-test when instead she should have applied independent sample t-test, because paired sample t-test is for before and after situation, and independent sample t-test is for independent groups. Now, this is something that you can obviously avoid. So discuss with experts and try to write and get it reviewed. Obviously, start writing after reading enough papers and storing enough information. So start writing, and now obviously do not start writing the introduction. How can you introduce something when you do not know that particular thing or particular concept? Now, in order to know that particular concept, you have to read that particular concept. You have to write literature on it. So once you write the literature, then you can write the introduction, because literature will give you more gaps, more contradictions, more theories that you might be able to use, and obviously get it reviewed, not only by the experts or your supervisor, with your peers as well, those who you can trust. So get it reviewed. And again, don't be discouraged, take the critique openly. And I always say that, and we miss on this opportunity. Umar, if you have got that document that you first gave me, and I totally marked it red. It was 10-page document with maybe 15 pages comments from me, and that was all red. But he was not discouraged, and he took critique openly, and that's the reason he was able to publish at least 12 to 15 papers, I think, for by now, in Impact Factor journal, two of them in 3-star journals, and another paper is in Journal of Knowledge Management. Even experts these days, like, they can't publish in Journal of Knowledge Management. So take critique openly and be humble as well. Don't be proud that you are publishing. That's something that should be discouraged. Okay, so this was all about when you don't know what to do. These are the 10 steps that you should take and find out, like, this will help you what to do if you don't know what to do. Now, what are the contents today? So we are looking into business research proposal. So that starts with the title, a comprehensive yet concise title, not a story, but a concise and comprehensive title. Obviously, your university can have their own guidelines pertinent to the title. Some universities say it should be 15 words, maybe 20 words, maybe 25 words, 12 words, whatever the guideline is, you should follow this. Now, the next step is you write the background or rationale for your study. What's the background? What has been done? And now what you are proposing is why it should be done. So what's the background? What's the rationale? We are going to look into all these things in a greater detail and during the course of this session. Problem statement, research objectives, and research question. This is once you know, okay, this has been done and this should be done. Then you propose your thesis statement or your problem statement, and from that problem statement you extract your objectives, and from those objectives you draft your research questions. And once in your thesis is complete, you are actually answering those research questions. Once those research questions are answered, research objectives are achieved, and once those objectives are achieved, problem is solved. So this is the interrelationship between these three things. Then you write the literature review. Now in proposal, the literature review is not that detailed, but it should summarize your conceptual or your theoretical framework. You should be able to define the concepts, and you should be able to identify the interrelationship between the variables. Your research methodology comes next, your plan of work and time schedule, and then finally your references. Now, the session looks into the importance of research proposal, the elements that are to be included, those are mandatory, something that could be optional. Then your introduction, rationale for study, and these things we have already covered in the previous slides as content. So we are going to look into detail into each one of these things. Now, what is the importance of research proposal? A research proposal is a document of usually 6 to 10 pages. Now, again, this is subjective. You might come across, or like in Malaysia, they ask for a very detailed research proposal. In Pakistan, it's normally in universities, it's 6 to 10 pages. Maybe same in India, African countries, or England, or other countries. But obviously, you will have to follow the guidelines of your university. If they say that they want 100 pages, then obviously it has to be more detailed literature review, more detailed methodology that will become part of your thesis, obviously. Now, this proposed research is usually a master's or doctorate by thesis, but it can also be work for corporate purpose. Obviously, if you are doing corporate level research, applied research, then it can be initially in the form of a proposal. University students usually write research proposals for academics who may eventually supervise the work based on the proposal. Obviously, you write it for your thesis, and then obviously it is submitted to your senior academic in your department. Now, another reason to get the proposal right is that this can save you time in the long run. Again, I've mentioned it previously, do not make those silly mistakes that I've identified previously, and I'll be identifying some more mistakes later in this session. So try to take your time, try to be focused, do not make hasty decision, do not try to rush into writing or finalizing your proposal. Obviously, heed or take care of the time, but do not rush or unnecessarily rush to write your proposal. Now, if the proposal is well designed, well structured, well formulated, well thought of, it can form an outline of the thesis to follow, and ideally can be mapped onto various parts of the final thesis. Obviously, you can use your proposal to be part of your final thesis. That is perfectly allowed. Now, a research proposal can be rejected as unsuitable or poorly designed, and based on this, a piece of research can be rejected. Obviously, if your proposal is not right, your end product is not right. It's just like building a house. If your design is not right, obviously you can't build a house. So the proposal is therefore an important document, one that is worth spending some time on to get right. Now, elements to be included in proposal. What should be included in proposal? Something that is mandatory. Introduction or background to the research problem or issue, including an identification of gap in the current research. It's sometimes I come across a proposal in which students have written a very good introduction. They have identified the value of the topic. They have identified why this particular concept, why this particular topic should be studied in this particular area. They have identified, yes, there is a problem, but what they fail to identify is whether there is a need to study this particular problem. What has been done in previous research pertinent to this particular problem or this particular area or this particular topic? What relationships have been tested? And if you are proposing to test new relationship, why they should be tested? Now, this is again very important for your theoretical contributions. Sometimes we come across papers and theses and proposals in which the student has written, okay, Mr. So and so or Umar et al. Has proposed that this particular variable should be tested as mediator. Okay, well and good. Yes, very good. They have proposed because they have published their research. It's very viable. But then they fail to identify why this particular variable should be tested. Now, this why is your theoretical contribution. That was what. So obviously there is a video on theoretical contribution. Do watch it so you understand this, the difference between what and why. So this is particularly important. Rationale for this study. Once you obviously, again, why this research is needed. Why should I take knowledge management practices as a mediator between internal marketing and organizational performance? Why should I do a multi-level study? Why should I conduct a study in higher education? Why should I conduct a study on public sector organizations? Why? So this is your contribution. This builds to become your theoretical contribution. Then you propose your problem statement. How to do it? We'll be looking at it. Research questions and research question objectives are followed by this problem statement should have been research objectives and research questions, so mind the typing error. Significance of study. What's the significance? Why is this particular study important? In research, you obviously, when you are writing paper, this is in the form of implications, the theoretical implications, the policy implications, the individual level implications, the managerial implications, the organizational implications. What's the benefit of the study? And then the contribution of the research into the general area or specific area. What are your contributions? Now, some of the times students have mentioned all these 5 points above, but they fail to mention the contribution of their study and their proposal is rejected. So you need to mention the contribution of your study as well. Now, again, moving on, preliminary literature review. I've already mentioned you need to define the concepts, operationalize them. How are you going to define them in your study? And followed by this, how are these variables interrelated with each other, so that you can propose your research model that people can believe in, that a reader, a supervisor, a reviewer can believe in. Your theoretical or conceptual framework. Now, whether it should be called theoretical or conceptual framework, again, there is a very good video on the channel. Your proposed research methodology, your research plan and outline, and your timetable of proposed research. Now, these things are mandatory in a research proposal. And finally, list of references. What have you done, or from where did you collect this particular information? And this shows, now the style of like following the guidelines for references shows your seriousness. Sometimes what we do is we copy and paste it from here and there, and the references are missing either the volume number, the issue number, and other things. So this shows your lack of seriousness. And this is especially important, very important. I'm saying it's critical, because most of you will be writing your proposal to be submitted to international universities. And you know what? There is a very good author on CSR, Andrea Perez, and she writes in CSR. She has published extensively in CSR, and we've been lucky enough to work with her. And you know what she told me? She rejects most of the proposals internationally because they have got a weak list of references. Why? Because this shows lack of seriousness of the graduates. And even when I'm working with her, and me and Umar are working with her, and the first thing that she looks into whenever we send a draft paper, she looks into references, and she sends the paper back without any comments, and she says, Fawad, first set the references. Now this is particularly important. Now, elements to be included in a proposal, optional. Limitations of research. Now, what the research is not intended to do, like limitations of your research, not the existing research, because that is mandatory. So this is something that can be optional. Obviously, because literature is just the proposal is just an initial intent. Now this intent could be changed, new variables could be included. So obviously you cannot write the limitation right at the start. What resources are you going to use? Equipments, that's basically for lab related research. So obviously in business research we hardly use any equipment, but for finance related you can obviously look into the type of data you are going to use, or the type of proxies that you are going to use, or the sources of data that you might use. Now, statement by which means the research will be evaluated or tested. This is something that is optional. So how do you think that your research will be evaluated, or how do you think that your final outcome will be this, or how should your research be judged? So statement a statement of where and how results of the research will be disseminated. Again, this is something that is too early to decide how your research will be distributed or where it should be published. Background of the researcher and their suitability for the task. This is again not required because you have taken the admission, something that is obviously optional. Some of these points are for project-based students or something that is maybe in life sciences or other sciences. So, writing your introduction. The introduction should be as brief as possible, a paragraph or two. Whatever, you don't ramble on for pages. You need to make this part the proposal clear and crisp. Now you have got 2 or 3 paragraphs, and in those 3 paragraphs you have to mention all those things. You have to mention the value of your research, you have to mention the existing research, you have to mention the limitations in the existing research and the gaps in existing research. In the introduction, you need to give a sense of general field of research of which area is a part. You then need to narrow to the specific area of your concern. You start with general idea as to why this particular area is important, and then you narrow it down to why this particular topic is important in this particular area. For example, you might start generally with, okay, why leadership is important, and then you narrow it down to why leadership is important in higher education, because this is what you are interested in maybe, or why leadership is important in public sector. So this should lead logically to the gap in the research that you intend to fill. When the gap is identified, a research question then can be raised. The answer to this question is called a thesis statement. Now, the general area is a particular conversation among academics in the field of study. So your general area may be leadership. Why is it important? You identify with existing research. What have existing research scholars or academics mentioned as to why this particular area is worthy of study? The specific area is your focus, a particular part of the bigger conversation. Why this leadership or servant leadership or knowledge-oriented leadership or sustainable leadership be studied in higher education or be studied in public sector, or maybe fast moving consumer goods, or maybe health industry. So now you have to be very focused. You cannot use references from here and there and say, well, okay, this is important, this was found important in this area, so this will be important in this particular area as well. No, this is not how you do it. That's not a general conversation. It has to be very focused, with focused references. Now, what is a gap? The gap is what you notice needs to be said in the conversation. The gap is what needs to be done. The gap is what existing research has proposed should be done. So this is your gap. And I've already mentioned how you can get gaps from existing research in this particular session as well, while there is a video available on the net that, okay, where to start your research using existing research. So what you do is you go for the limitations and future research directions in an existing paper. For instance, let's say you are interested in okay, there are a number of okay, I will answer. Obviously, you will get the PPT, definitely you will get the videos as well. All questions will be answered in the end. Thank you very much. Okay, let's say okay, let's say you want to propose a new research and you want to find out, okay, where can I find that, okay, how should I improve existing research? Where are the gaps in existing research? A very simple answer could be, let's say this is a paper. So just go into the end and limitations and future research directions of the paper. And there you will find that they have proposed new mediators that can be used, new moderators that could be used. For example, in future studies with knowledge management processes, knowledge management approaches, social networking, codification, and personalization should be tested as mediator. So what you can do is, instead of knowledge management processes, you can take these mediators and use this model with these mediators. Instead of knowledge management processes, you can use those mediators. Obviously, it is recommended that you do not base your gaps onto just one single paper. Try to get it from other papers as well. So 2 or 3 papers for your gaps would be good enough for a master's thesis. For PhD, obviously there are other things should be considered as well. Obviously it should come from multiple papers. Obviously you should look into what theories have been existingly utilized and what new theories can be utilized. So in PhD you have to use those things as well. Now, okay, the research question asks something to address the gap. Now, okay, again you propose your problem statement, you propose your research objectives, and you propose your research questions. Now, the thesis statement is your tentative or proposed answer to this question. What you expect to get out of this research. This is your thesis statement. Discuss your gap implicitly or explicitly, or you can use both. What is implicit gap? Something that is not mentioned in existing research. Like I can't find that somebody has said, okay, these variables should be taken as mediators. But if somebody has said that these variables should be taken as mediators, this is explicit gap. Now, how do you justify implicit gap? Then you develop relationships between variables. For example, you can say how entrepreneurial leadership could influence innovation. Nobody has said that innovation should be a mediator between entrepreneurial leadership and project success. But you think that yes, innovation could be a mediator. Then you have to explain how innovation is linked to entrepreneurial leadership and how innovation leads to project success. This is your implicit gap, but you have to justify it as well. The thesis statement may only be tentative at this stage. Again, we have already discussed this, that it is your tentative statement. It is not expected in a proposal that you have an answer to your research question. This is what a thesis provides. However, because the thesis will provide you your thesis statement, because now you have tested your data or your framework, so you are now in a better position to have a conclusive evidence. Okay, this is what my thesis did, this is what I got out of it. However, it helps you to have a tentative answer that okay, yes, the variables or these variables will be related with each other, that you are proposing that these variables will be related with each other. A hypothesis is useful for this purpose, though this might only be necessary for more empirical subjects like economics or HR or any other. Further points to note: outline any controversies. This is very important. Now, if you are reading through the literature and if you read enough from the literature, you might find out that one study has said that okay, there is a positive relationship between the two variables, while another has mentioned okay, there is a negative relationship between the variables, while another has mentioned there is no relationship between the variables. So this gives you further ground to conduct a research or further ground to relate particular variables with each other. Use symbol and jargon free language. Obviously research has got its own language. It should be very simple and it should be jargon free, and it's not what you call it, a novel or a work of fiction. So avoid using those language that is used in fiction or a novel. The introduction must narrow down, not get wider. Obviously, you start with the general area and then you obviously get as specific as possible. Now, rationale for the study, 1 page obviously is sufficient. That obviously it's justify why this study should be conducted. The size of the industry or area involved. Okay, what industry or area you are going to look into, and is the reason that you have to mention this is this justifies as to why this study should be conducted in this particular area. Now, gaps in the literature pertinent to that particular area, we have already talked about this. The unusual or improved methodology being used. Okay, now obviously there could be two opinions on this. You can mention a brief about your methodology in the rationale. Okay, this methodology I'm going to use and why you are going to use it, and then the detail of the methodology comes in the research methodology section. Now, benefits in terms of policy and practice. How will it benefit the policy makers or the policy implication? Now, what are the practical implications? Now, what is the anatomy of a problem statement? How do you write a problem statement? Let's say this is a problem statement. To determine the extent to which career satisfaction mediates the relationship between servant leadership and life satisfaction in higher education institutions. Now, to identify key terms in your problem statement, look for the subjects. Now, what are the subjects in the study? Servant leadership, career satisfaction, and life satisfaction are the subjects that are going to be studied. What are the verbs? What relationships are you going to test? You are going to test impact and mediating role. Where are you going to test this? You are going to test it in higher education institutions. Now, these things should be part of your problem statement. Now, definition of key terms must be precise in order to identify the subjects of the research and to gain access to the relevant academic literature. Precise definitions will allow you to explore the literature. Now, whenever you are defining the concepts, you should have precise and clear and concise definitions. Now, the literature review, what it will do is it will help you refine your research objectives and research questions. That's the reason I was saying earlier that do not start by writing your introduction. Start by reading literature as much as possible, so that this gives you a clear idea as to what your research objectives should be, how you should formulate your research questions, and this will give feasibility to your topic. Another example, this would highlight the issue that needs to be addressed. For instance, if a study would like to investigate the impact this is another example of problem statement. To ascertain the impact of internal marketing orientation on knowledge management processes in higher education institutions, and further assess the mediating role of knowledge worker satisfaction on the linkage between knowledge management processes and higher education institutions' performance in China. So, your study setting, your subjects, your objects, your verbs, all in there. Now, based on that particular problem statement, you can draft your research objectives. I've just drafted two. You can obviously divide them further. To ascertain the impact of internal marketing orientation on knowledge management processes in higher education institution. To assess the mediating role of knowledge worker satisfaction on the linkage between knowledge management processes and higher education institution performance in China. Now, if you see, these objectives are clearly in line with your problem statement. Your research questions. Note that the research question may not be a question as such, but rather a statement of problem to be investigated. Well, yes, sometimes what happens is it's not a statement as such, and it looks like a statement rather than a question. But most of the times in context of a subcontinent or Malaysia, India, Pakistan, it is in the form of a question. Okay, it could be obviously phrased in the form of question or formal hypothesis. Now, these are sample research questions. Does IM has an impact on KM processes in universities of China? Is there a direct impact of KM processes on OPs in universities of China? And the third is, does KWS mediate the relationship between KM processes and OP in universities in China? Now further, you write the contribution of your study. In this section, you highlight what is it that your study is doing that has not been done before. How are you contributing to the literature? What is new that you are doing? Since you have already explained previously in the introduction the limitations of existing research, the gaps that there exist, and the gaps that you want to fill, now it's very easy for you to write your contribution. So the importance of research outcomes, the practical or theoretical nature of outcomes, these should be part of your contribution. Now, here is a very good example of how to write your sample contributions. Now, based on the gaps and limitations, the objective of the study is to ascertain interrelationship between IM, KM processes, KWS, and OP in higher education institutions in China. To bridge the limitations, this research assumes to fill the identified knowledge gaps of KM in higher education institutions, and in doing so makes several theoretical contributions to existing literature by assessing. Now, these are the contribution now. What's the first contribution? Assessing the interrelationship between IM, KM processes, these are the processes, KWS and OP. The study first assesses the impact of IM on KM processes and further ascertains whether KWS mediates the relationship between IM and OP. Now, these are the contributions of the study. Now, why would these contributions be helpful? This would help in providing a basis for understanding the mediating mechanism through which KM processes affect the performance of HEIs. with significantly limited research, on the role of KM. Now this is again, you are mentioning how would this help in Chinese sector, where you have mentioned, okay, these are the well, there have been very limited research on Chinese higher education. So why is this important? Why should this study be conducted in China? Because it will highlight the role of KM in China. Now obviously the further details are in the literature section. The research study endeavors to contribute to the field of KM in higher education institutions and further understandings towards two-factor theory. Now it is again very important to mention what theory you are using and how are you contributing to the theory, because these relationships have not been tested in light of two-factor theory. That's why we are making this contribution to the theory. So what the theory talked about, well, there are multiple ways to write contributions as well. This is one way. Another way could be that you, in your introduction, you can have a paragraph or so on the theory. What theory you are using, how do you define it, and has there been previous research, or why should this theory be used? And then in contribution you mention how are you contributing to the theory, because this theory has not been utilized to evaluate these relationships, or or establishing these relationships in light of this theory will obviously enrich this theory. So this is why, or this is how you use the theory. Now preliminary literature review. Obviously you can write around 2 pages or more depending again on the university. What is preliminary literature review? You write the definitions of the concepts or the major school of thoughts. Okay, now if you are working on identity or employee identity or employee identification or organizational identification, this particular variable actually flows from social identity theory. So you can't just go on and write the definition of the concept without identifying the major issues or school of thoughts or the major theories. Then you go for the definitions of the terms, and how are you going to define it in your study? And then how are variables related to each other? Do not just say that, okay, Mr. X said this variable is related with this, Mr. Y said this variable is related with this, and now I am saying this variable is related with this. Obviously, if Mr. X and Y has said this, there's no need for you to say this. There should be critique in your literature review. It should be critical literature review. If they have said it, why have they said it? Are there any contradictions? If they said it, did they measure in a particular setting, and your setting is different to that particular setting? That gives you the reason for your research. So try to identify any contradictions in your or the variables that you are interested in. Question arising from gaps that can be the focus of data collection analysis. Obviously, when you are reading through the literature, you are obviously identifying the gaps that can be part of your introduction as well, part of your literature review as well if there are contradictions, and this can help you understand how to collect data on that particular variable. For example, most of the previous studies have taken this particular concept as unidimensional, but you think that this is a multidimensional concept, so this should be studied as a multidimensional concept. Again, this obviously is facilitating your data collection, data preparation, or your questionnaire process or questionnaire development process. So this is an example of sample literature. I'm not going to read all of this, but this is how your literature should be. You should define the concepts and then obviously look into how this particular concept may be linked to that particular area in which you are working. You can't just go on and write general literature review. That's why the heading here is knowledge management in higher education. If you are focusing on a particular area, your literature should focus on that particular area as well. Now the theoretical or conceptual framework usually forms the final part of your literature review section, and it is depicted in the form of a model. So the model is a visual interpretation of your theoretical or conceptual framework. There's a difference between conceptual and theoretical framework. Well, there is a difference, or they can be complementary as well. Some say that theoretical framework is one where you use one theory. Some say that theoretical framework is one where you use multiple theories. Conceptual framework, when different concepts are flowing from different theories and are interrelated with each other, and those interrelationships are expressed in the form or through a theory. There is a very detailed video on conceptual and theoretical framework. Please do watch it. It will clear all your misconceptions on the YouTube channel. Umar will share the link onto the WhatsApp group. So you will know that whether there is a difference between conceptual or theoretical framework, or whether they are complementary to each other, or whether they are the same thing. Now this is a sample framework. This is part of one of the paper that we did on KM enablers, KM processes, innovation, intellectual capital, organizational performance, and now your research methodology. Now you do not have to describe the methodology in greater detail, but you should justify its use over other methodology. Or if you are using a particular methodology, if you are using a particular way to send questionnaires, if you are using a particular technique, if you are using a particular analysis technique, if you are using a particular scale, why should that scale be used? Why should that analysis be used? Why should that sampling technique be used? If you are using convenience sampling, what's your justification? If you are doing random sampling, most of the people, we do not understand what simple random sampling is. We normally say that, okay, we are going into an office and we just gave our questionnaire and we did it randomly. But this is not random sampling. We are planning, Umar and me are planning a complete session on misuse of sampling, or understanding sampling in practically and using it practically. So there will be a session on that as well. Now, what's the paradigm or theory that you are going to use? Is your research qualitative or quantitative? Is it survey based, correlational experiment? Is it field study? What kind of statistical measures are you going to use? How are you going to distribute your questionnaire? How are you going to collect the data? The timing of your questionnaire, is it going to be a cross-sectional study or longitudinal study, or is it going to be a multi-wave data? All the details must be part of this particular section. Your dependent and independent and moderating variables and how they are measured, you can obviously separate them in your measure section. Write the dependent variable, then how it is measured. Write the independent, how is it measured. Write the moderating, how is it measured. Write the mediating, how is it measured. Sampling frame, how are you going to finalize your sample? You have to identify, okay, this is my sampling frame from which I'm going to collect my sample, and this is my sample size, this is my sampling technique. You could also explain how you are going to propose to have access to the data, especially for those in finance. How are you going to access the data? And when you are doing a sensitive study, obviously if you are doing studies on maybe say survey based study on armed forces, so how are you going to access armed forces? The armed personnel never obviously will answer your question. Or if you are going to access maybe bank customers, how are you going to access bank customers? If you plan to use simple random sampling, obviously then you have to justify or identify how you are going to access it. How are you going to analyze the data? What analysis techniques are you going to use? This is very important. I came across a proposal while I was sitting somewhere in a proposal defense, and the student mentioned, I'm going to use this. And I simply asked him, what is this? And he said that I don't know what is this. Then how can you mention it in your proposal if you do not know what is this? So always write what you know about. Or if you want to use something, read about it and see if you can use it or not. Now obviously operational definitions, they can be part of your literature review or methodology as well, depending on the format or structure proposed by your supervisor. This is sample methodology. The research was conducted in research universities. The population sample and how the data was collected, the measures used. So this is something that you can obviously format your methodology on as well. The slides will definitely be shared. Thank you. Moving on, your research plan. So how do you plan to complete your research? What time you are going to allot to each of your sections? In what time do you think you are going to write the literature, then the introduction, maybe then the methodology or other parts of your study? So it will give you obviously a framework for direction to complete your thesis in time. And then obviously it shows your supervisor that you are well organized and you know that how you are going to allot your time to different sections. So obviously the extra time can be decided with your when you can agree with your supervisors. Now okay, obviously this is tentative timetable, so you are not actually committing to anything, but this is tentative, can be changed later. This is a sample timetable. I'm not going to in detail with these things because these are very subjective, and obviously your supervisor can or you can discuss it with your supervisor based on how much time you have got left for your thesis. Another thing that is again based on the university you are working on, the size of the chapter or the sections, how long they should be. Obviously an introduction in your case maybe 5,000 words, or literature could be 15,000 words. The methodology could be 10,000, but the data analysis could be 25,000. Discussion, conclusion and implication could be 20,000. So again, purely subjective, but this is how you can present it in your proposal. List of references, again I've already mentioned it. It should be in very scholarly fashion. It should be, if it's one style APA, it should all be in APA. If it's Harvard, it should all be in Harvard. And obviously it makes a strong impact. Now this is what I was trying to come to, and this is what we are going to discuss in greater detail. These are the common mistakes that we make while writing our proposal. If we can avoid these mistakes, we can write a very structured, very commendable, very comprehensive, very acceptable proposal. Now I haven't taken these mistakes all by myself. I today consulted two senior lecturers, one assistant professor, one working in Australia, one working in New Zealand, one working in Swinburne University, and he will hopefully join us for some sessions as well. And another working in Messi, New Zealand, and they helped me identify these 10 to 12 mistakes that are common and that can be avoided. Now, replication. Do not replicate a study. If some study has been done in America, you can't just use that particular study and do it in Pakistan. There is no contribution whatsoever of this kind of study. So replication is no contribution. Again, there is a video on contribution, a detailed video on what is contribution. Lack of coherence in the problem statement, objectives and research questions. Your problem statement is saying something else, your research questions are saying something else, and your research objectives are saying something else, and your research questions are saying something else. So there is a lack of coherence. They are not flowing from each other. Your research objectives should flow from your problem statements, just as we did earlier. Or there are videos available where I have mentioned, okay, this is how problem statement flows into objectives and how objectives flows into research questions. So there should be proper coherence between the three. You fail to identify the gaps and limitations in existing research. You have just mentioned, okay, this particular area I'm interested in, and this particular area is very important, and this is my research problem statement, this is my research objectives, and these are my research questions, and that's it. Well, this is not research. This won't be accepted. So you need to properly identify the gaps and limitations in existing research. Lack of support. Yes, you have mentioned the gaps. You have mentioned, okay, there is very little research on this particular concept. Or you have mentioned that this variable should be studied as a mediator, as a moderator, maybe as an independent, maybe as dependent, but you fail to write proper support, or you fail to provide proper support to your argument as to why this particular variable should be studied. You have mentioned it, okay, why this should be important, but you fail to support it with proper reference. Even if you write, okay, this is why this particular variable should be studied, and you fail to support it, then this is very weak. This is my idea. Again, this is you can't say and go on to your supervisor or examiner and say, well, this is my idea, this is what I think. Yes, it is important what you think, but again, most importantly, apart from saying that this is my idea, you have to support your idea with comprehensive, concrete evidence from existing literature. Lack of theory or theoretical positioning and theoretical positioning. You've got a very good idea, you've written a proposal, but you fail to identify what theory you are going to use to establish relationship between variables, or there is lack of theoretical support for your arguments, or you have used a wrong theory to explain the relationship between variables. Where I should have used or social identity theory to assess the impact of corporate social responsibility on employee identity, I have used social learning theory or maybe social exchange theory. Maybe you might provide some kind of argument, but this is wrong. So you have to identify proper theory that can be positioned in your research. How to do it? Use existing literature, see what that particular theory says, and see whether that theory has been used with this particular variable that you are interested in. Even if it's not used with that particular variable, when you read through the theory, you can provide suitable justification as to why this theory can be used to establish these relationships, and then again show it to experts so that they can tell you, yes, you have used the theory in the right manner. Causal explanation in terms of theory. Now, if you are explaining something, it's not that just like describe the theory. You have to explain how this theory would help explain the relationship between the variables. It's not enough just to describe that, okay, we have used this theory, this is no contribution. You have to explain why this theory can be useful in explaining the relationship between these variables. How do I know how to write this? Again, read papers and take notes. Your study failed to mention study contributions. You have written a very good introduction, but you failed to mention the contributions of your study. Now, there are no theoretical or practical implications of your study. So failure to do so obviously it's a very common mistakes that people do that get their projects or their research proposal rejected. So you have to mention what are the theoretical implications of this study, what are you going to contribute, or what have you contributed, or what will you contribute to the theory, how this research will help practitioners. Lack of operationalization. I've written a very good proposal, but I haven't defined the concepts that I am going to study. I haven't mentioned this is how I'm going to define the concepts. Obviously, when you fail to define the concepts, you fail to properly measure the concepts, because you are always measuring the concepts in light of the operationalization you did. Let me give you a simple example. Let's say I want to study social responsibility in universities. I haven't given any definition, and I come across this scale by Carroll. And you know what, the scale by Carroll, the one dimension in Carroll scale is economic dimension. But I want to study social responsibility in universities. I cannot use economic dimension in my study. Why? Because universities are not economic entities. But if you fail to understand the concept, if you fail to operationalize the concept, you mistakenly obviously use that particular construct in your study. You collect the data, and once you have the data, you are now in trouble. You can't drop that construct, you can't use that construct, because your examiners would say, well, this or economic dimension cannot be part of a university, because universities are not economic entities. There's lack of structure and format. I'm going to show you an example for this as well. Lack of clarity in research methodology, whether you are going for qualitative or quantitative. I've come across proposal where scholars have mentioned they are going to use qualitative methodology, and in the end there was a proper questionnaire. So you do not know what qualitative or quantitative is. No indication of how research participants or companies will be selected. How are you going to select your sample? This is particularly important. What's your sample frame? How are you going to access them? Incorrect identification of analysis technique. Just as I gave an example earlier, you fail to identify what proper analysis technique you are going to utilize. You say you are going to do paired sample t-test, but you haven't got data before and after situation. It's a cross-sectional data, not longitudinal data. Or maybe any other analysis technique. You are saying that you are going to use exploratory factor analysis, but you should not use exploratory factor analysis, because your instruments are coming from the literature, they are already established scales, so you should go directly to CFA. Now we are going to take questions. Before I take questions, I'm going to give you an example of a research proposal. I hope there is no name on that, and I hope that particular person is not part of this webinar. I got this proposal. I was working with a professor in Spain, and he asked me would I be a co-supervisor for this particular proposal, and he sent me this proposal for review. Now have a look at this proposal. This is not to demean or degrade anyone, because there is no name, so that's one thing. Look at this proposal. This is how the proposal was sent to him. There is no title page, first of all, and circular economy model. This title does not tell you anything about the research, what the research is all about. It does not tell you, okay, is there any impact? What type of studies it is going to be? What variables will be the part of this study? It looks like an essay rather than a research proposal. The introduction, okay, starts with a whole paragraph with a reference at the end. This is annotated bibliography. This is just a narration. Same is the case with this one. Now again, the scholar just jumps into the purpose and aims without identifying the rationale for this study. What are the gaps in the existing research? What are the limitations of the existing research? So the scholar just jumps directly into the purpose and aims, and even the purpose and aims are not clear. Designing parts in standardized and modular form to facilitate the process of recycling. Again, okay, so it's a contrived study, so they might be obviously thinking of changing what's happening on the ground. So these are the objectives. They rather look like recommendations rather than study objectives. Now what's the target population? Our research, obviously it's our means more than one person. Would analyze consumer acceptance in low income, middle income and high income consumers across EU. Well, this particular person, it wants to study the whole of EU. Is this possible? EU has got like maybe say more than 30 countries now, I think. If I'm wrong, I don't know. Although I've spent time in England, but I don't know how many countries are in there. So data collection will be done through surveys, structured interviews, experiments, action research and ethnography. How many techniques, like he included or she included any technique that he got or she got hold of? This is not literally possible. Then there is a questionnaire. How did you get this questionnaire? This is something that looks like a qualitative research, but here it was mentioned surveys. So then again the literature, I can go on and on. So but these are research methodology. So what is, okay, these are the independent variables. So what are the other variables in your study if these are the independent variables? This is work plan. Again, doesn't make any sense. References, look at the references. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Very few references with no identification of the journal, the volume, the issue and things like that. You do not send a proposal like this to your supervisor, let alone you are sending it for a scholarship in Spain. So be cautious of these things. Avoid making these mistakes. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to take your